Hello and welcome to the BSAVA Science webinar, With a Difference. In previous episodes, we have taken a closer look at some of the papers published in the Journal of Small Animal Practice, but today we're going to jump to the other end of the research process and discuss a project that is still ongoing, the PetSavers Old Age Pets project. I'm Luisa Dormer, Scientific Editor at the BSAVA, and today I'm joined by Sarah Williams, Zoe Belshaw and Carri Westgarth. Sarah is the coordinator of PetSavers, the branch of the BSAVA that funds research into veterinary science and medicine. Zoe is a European and RCVS recognised specialist in small animal internal medicine with interests in geriatric medicine and the decisions made by people on behalf of pets. Her mixed methods PhD at the Centre for Evidence-Based Veterinary Medicine at the University of Nottingham explored how vets and owners make decisions about dogs with osteoarthritis. She currently combines clinical work with editing the What is Your Client Thinking section of the Vet Record and membership of the RCVS Ethical Review Panel. Zoe's involvement in the PetSavers Old Age Pets project is to advise on the qualitative aspects of the research. Carri is a senior lecturer in human-animal interaction in the Department of Livestock and One Health, Institute of Infection, Veterinary and Ecological Sciences at the University of Liverpool. Her research interests focus on the implications of dog ownership for human health and well-being, but also how owner management of their dogs can impact dog welfare. Carri is leading the PetSavers Old Age Pets project and will assist with interviewing dog owners and veterinary professionals to discover key themes regarding living with and caring for a senior dog. She will also supervise the analysis of data from veterinary consultations and development of the practical tool for use in veterinary practice to guide owners and veterinary professionals in conversations about the health and well-being of senior dogs. Thank you all very much for joining me today. So Carri, for anybody who listening who is not aware of the project already, please could you outline the purpose of the study?
So the purpose of the Old Age Pets study is to, although it says Old Age Pets, it's actually about dogs, but we like the OAP acronym and the meaning of it, so we went with it. It's about understanding the experiences and perceptions of owners about what it's like to live with an aging dog and what sorts of health and welfare things they notice and what they do about it. And then also looking at the veterinary perspective side of trying to understand how vets approach consultations and conversations with clients about their aging animals, what sort of things vets and nurses think that perhaps owners aren't so great at noticing signs for, and kind of so where these things match, these perspectives, and where they perhaps mismatch, and how can we facilitate those conversations perhaps better in a more structured way? What are the key things perhaps we need to think about moving forward to encourage those discussions and get the owners noticing perhaps things that they wouldn't have noticed, or get the vets realizing what the owners do notice and perhaps then would be a better way to frame those conversations and things to ask about. So trying to think of a framework really from both perspectives, because aging animals is it's a serious welfare issue if things aren't being picked up and animals aren't aging well. So how can we perhaps improve that process? So we thought we'd design a tool in the end. We're very vague about what the tool is at this stage of the project, and our ideas about how that might look is changing over time as we're doing the project, which is really quite interesting, because you come into a project with some assumptions of what might be the issues, and then you might quickly realize once you actually go and talk to people about owning animals and how they make their decisions around them and what it's like, that you realize that perhaps what I thought would be the best way to solve this problem is not the best way, which is the genius of the qualitative research approach, I think. Hopefully that's enough.
Thank you, Carri. It's a really exciting project, and it'll be interesting to see what owner expectations, experiences and attitudes are in relation to senior dog health care and treatment, and how that matches with what's currently available in veterinary practices. Zoe, you do a lot of work in this area with your series in the Vet Record, What is Your Client Thinking? Could you tell us a little bit more about why you're interested in owner experiences of living with the senior dog, please?
Yeah, sure. So my own experience that led me to doing a PhD in this topic a few years ago was kind of two coincidental things, really. So first of all, I had an elderly terrier myself, and then he developed osteoarthritis and chronic bronchitis, and I realised just how much of a negative impact that was having on my own quality of life, how stressed I was about him, how hard I found it to get information. And I thought, gosh, if this is me as a vet with access to all of these specialists and I don't know what to do, and I could feel myself making totally irrational, emotive decisions and worrying about things I probably didn't need to, withholding medications because I was worried about side effects, which was disproportionate to the risk, and just doing all of these things that I thought, gosh, if I was one of my clients, I'd think that, you know, I wasn't doing a very good job. So that happened, and that made me really think, gosh, if this is me in this situation, what must it be like if you didn't have access to all the resources and the help that I have? It must be really tough. And also at the same time, I was working in referral medicine practice for the university, and I happened to see a run of dogs back to back that had multicentric lymphoma. So what was really interesting with those is that the dogs looked really similar. And my advice to the owners was pretty much the same about what we do here, the options, these are treatments available, this is probably your best option here. And yet those three different owners chose to do three totally different things. So I then suddenly started thinking, hang on, well, I'm saying the same stuff and the dog looks the same, and yet the decisions they've made are really different. And so there must be something that's going on in their heads that's pre-formed prior to them coming into the consult room, was happening outside the consult room, that I'm not able to understand necessarily and influence, because they've come for referral, yet one went for euthanasia almost immediately, one went for the protocol I advised, and another one wanted to do absolutely everything, you know, much further than I would have thought for that pet's quality of life. And so that just got me really interested in thinking there's a lot of stuff here with the owner management of these pets that is hugely affecting this holy grail of the median survival time, which is what in oncology is one of the things that we talk about a lot. And actually then, you know, it's nothing to do with the dog's disease. This is now about, you know, our standard advice, sort of standard dog. It's when these owners are choosing to put these dogs to sleep that independent to an extent of this dog's disease progression, yet all of those go into a median survival time, which makes for quite messy data. And so that's what really got me interested in thinking we need to understand what's going on here in these interactions. Maybe I'm framing things wrong, maybe I've not asked them the right questions, maybe there is just this huge incongruity sometimes in what expectations are, and I just got really obsessed with it, to the point that I thought I can't leave this, I need to explore it further. So those were two things really that came together and made me think I've had this experience, and now I've seen it from the other side of the consulting room table, people going through similar experiences, and yeah, it just came together and made me think we need to talk about this more, and we really need to understand what's going on in owners' minds a little bit better, so we can, as Carri said, give them the best possible consultation for them. We can understand what they recognise, what they find hard, because I absolutely found that, you know, I just didn't anticipate the fact that my dog wanted to sniff every 2 meters for 5 minutes, and I needed to get to work on time, and I had in my mind a fixed idea of what a dog walk would look like and that he needed to go around the block. And after 20 minutes, I'd got to the end of my road and I was incredibly stressed about it. I would not have thought that that was a thing. You know, I just wouldn't have even considered that that would be an issue. And imagine if you've got kids to get to school or something, you know, and you've got to build that into your day. So yeah, lots of different things came together and made me think we need to understand owners better. And that then led to work which fits beautifully with this project, beautiful with the, you know, dog walking research that Carri's previously done. And it's a really nice progression of the stuff that I've done to then be involved in the next step, which is you know, trying to really help in the consult room.
Thank you, that does sound really interesting. So thinking about then what happens in the consult room, it's my understanding that you're going to develop a pro forma and guidance tool to use in consultations with senior dogs. And I was just wondering whether you envisage this tool to be kind of part of a standard consultation process for senior dogs, or whether it would be viewed more as a kind of add-on or a bolt-on. And the reason I'm asking that is because lack of time is often cited as a reason for vets not using tools or resources. So if we think about things like body condition score tools, for example, and I just wondered how you envisage this tool being used in a consultation.
Is that for me or for Carri?
Or both.
Carri, do you want to go first?
Yeah. So I think I originally envisaged it very much being used in the consultation, and I'm very aware that this idea has probably happened many times before, and vets just don't have the time to be going through like a big long questionnaire or anything like that. So I wanted it to be really simple and like, you know, is there 5 key things that perhaps you could just run through in your mind, have a poster on the wall, or prep the owners somehow before in the waiting room? Have you noticed this? Is this an issue for you and your dog? Can we just make sure that we've covered these things? If they could quickly even just glance these bullet points almost. So it's not there to replace quality of life tools, which are much more extensive. Having done the main interviews now, my postdoc Lisa Wallace has done some owner interviews and some vet interviews. One of the key things we're finding so far actually is that if this is just a tool for use in the veterinary consultation, we're missing the point, because many of these dogs aren't going for a veterinary consultation, because a key part of healthy aging for owners is that the dog doesn't need to see the vet and doesn't go for vaccinations either a lot of the time. So that's making us rethink perhaps what this tool might look like. I guess I'll still try and keep it very simple, but there perhaps will be much more of an element of, can we also use it to get people to go to the vets with their animal when they possibly wouldn't have before, because what they're observing they just thought was just old age. It was another key theme. And another idea that's coming out and links very much with what Zoe said before is, I personally, from seeing the data, want to make sure there is an element of caregiver burden discussed with the vets, because it's all well and good us saying and thinking this is what the animal needs, but this is a partnership, and what the owner needs is, I hate to say it, it is just as important. And if we don't take that into account, these conversations, these decisions aren't going to happen in the right way. And when my last dog was aging, I mean, this was really important for me as well. And I thankfully have a good relationship with the vet who saw her at the time. We've known each other for a long time through he used to come to the dog training classes and things that we ran. But you know, for me, she wasn't. My friend said, I would say but she's not dying. And my friend, not the vet, another colleague would say, she is, just very slowly. That's your problem with making this decision. She had a number of different issues that I thought were causing her some distress some of the time. But to come home from work and find feces walked all over the utility room and kitchen, where she had an accident, got stressed, paced around and walked it around, and the other 2 dogs sat in the corner horrified at the fact that they've been put in this situation. You know, to have those frank conversations, some people, that's fine, they will do anything for their animals, but that's hard for a family with a young child and other animals and things like that. So yeah, I can relate to those experiences that were coming through in our interviews. We've only done a small number of interviews with owners and a small number of interviews with vets, but very in depth as to how their experiences are. And that's kind of the point, the qualitative part of the project. It's not about getting the breadth so much. You can't really do that in qualitative. And you're spending 2 or 3 hours talking to someone and then hours and hours analysing line by line those transcripts. It's more about getting those depth, but caregiver burden is a theme. Perhaps that the quality of life tools that we have at the moment are very much focused more on the dog. So that's kind of where we are with the thinking so far on what sorts of things might be included. But I do want to make this tool as easy for the vets and nurses or whatever, whoever they think is the best people to do this as possible to use.
Thank you. Zoe, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, just to say, from my experience in practice, really, I've spent a couple of years now doing part-time work for the PDSA and the local branch here doing consultations. And after my PhD, I started focusing in a lot more on the owner experience and this kind of caregiver burden, anticipatory grief. So when people are trying to make decisions to euthanize their pets, and it was something I started to build into my consultations. We only had 10-minute consults, but when I was seeing pets with chronic disease, I was almost trying to alternate a chat about the dog one time, and then if it was relatively stable, the next one I'd start talking to the owner about how they were coping and what was going on. And that's led to me doing more research with Rowena Packer at the Royal Vet College, looking at owner experiences of dogs with epilepsy. And again, that, you know, that's mind-blowingly difficult. I thought osteoarthritis was bad, but when you talk to owners of dogs with epilepsy, it's a whole other level of anxiety and sleepless nights and a whole life disruption where people are just putting their lives on hold for a long time. And I talked then lots to my owners that I came across at the PDSA of epileptic dogs, and it very much holds true. And I think the challenge is always, you know, negotiating that line between what our job is in our minds and what it kind of maybe needs to be, because we need to really recognize that without the owner being well, being able to support their pets, feeling supported themselves, then they're not going to be able to optimize their pet's welfare. And I think we've had a tendency to really shy away from that kind of social work element. It's not what we're trained for. Owners aren't particularly well covered in veterinary courses. You know, it's very much a focus on, totally understandably, the health of the patients, to the point that maybe we don't know how to have those conversations, or if we did have them, and then perhaps we wouldn't quite know what to do with the owner in front of us. And there is certainly a tendency to think that just isn't my job. I don't want to go there because I don't want to open the floodgates. But I think that's the big part of animal welfare that really we've not been as good on as we can be, is really recognizing if you've got a lady with severe hand osteoarthritis and you're asking her to give a quarter of a, you know, a tiny codeine tablet twice a day into a dog's mouth, and it won't take it in food, that might be an impossible thing to ask her to do, but she might not tell you that. So all of those contextual things around, you know, can you get this medication in? Have you got somebody to help you? How are you doing? How are you coping with no sleep? And as Carri was saying, that trigger point for euthanasia, I had exactly the same with Mr. Bean, my dog. When do you do it with these chronic disease where they are lurching slowly towards an inevitable euthanasia, but you just think, is it today? Is it not today? Is it tomorrow? Is it next week? How am I going to know? And there's a huge element of guilt associated with even thinking about those decisions. So again, a tool that helps vets to validate that that's a normal feeling. It helps them to validate, you know, the owners are going to find this, going to be feeling guilty, and it's okay and it's normal to feel guilty, but there's got to be some kind of a balance between your quality of life and your pet's quality of life. And not everybody is going to want to hear that, but some owners are very, very relieved when they almost given permission to say it's time to stop. And there's a huge amount of work to do, I think, to work out how as a profession we build the time into you know, to having these conversations and supporting owners and putting support in place for them to turn to. You know, Blue Cross Pet Bereavement Support Line is brilliant. We'll talk to owners with anticipatory grief prior to them being put to sleep. You don't have to wait for the animal to be euthanized before you can access that service, and they're doing some really great work. But there's a lot more to come. So I think this tool will be really helpful as a conversation prompt, even as amongst us as a profession, to have a bit of a wake-up call and think, actually, these are important conversations, and maybe we can't just say that's not my job anymore, because it has to be our job, I think.
Absolutely.
And there might be situations as well where just by thinking, is there an element of owning my dog that's become harder to manage? And by just raising that with your vet, you might come up with a solution like, oh, actually, there's this drug we can prescribe that could help with that, or a management tool or something. Or that probably means there's the early signs of something going on that what you've noticed is just that it's getting a bit harder to look after them, or easier to look after them is another thing. Yeah. They're sleeping a lot, they don't really do much anymore, they're actually easier than they used to be. Those sorts of things could prompt those conversations that you could notice, you know, signs of clinical. I mean, I'm not clinical, so I can't talk about the clinical side of things. I'm not a vet, but yeah, you could hopefully find diseases earlier than you would have before by maybe framing the questions that way is our hope.
This just old age thing's really interesting that Carri talked about. That was huge in my osteoarthritis research as well. And interestingly, I did a bit of a time as an intern with what was then Arthritis Research UK and is now Versus Arthritis. And they were really talking about how, again, osteoarthritis in human healthcare is very much seen as a just old age sort of a problem, you know. And I interviewed some owners who had osteoarthritis themselves, and they didn't present their dog to the vet because they were told by their GP, it's just arthritis, take some painkillers, get on with it. So they said, well, why on earth would I take my dog to the vet if there's nothing you can do for people? So there's some big societal attitudes around aging, I think, as well, where maybe we'll be pushing up on against those, and this idea that it's just old age and it's normal not to be medicalized. You don't want to give tablets because, you know, it's just normal to slow down and get doddery in older age, is something that I think it will be quite challenging to overcome, really, because it is such a deeply held belief by some people, I think. And as Carri said, it sometimes can make life easier if you don't have to take your dog for 2 hours of walking anymore and it doesn't want to chase the ball. You can let people around the garden, and then for some people that's great. For some people it's devastating because their life was walking their dog. So it's really interesting stuff. Yeah,
certainly is. That's absolutely fascinating. You've already touched on this a little bit about qualitative research and really digging deep rather than the breadth. So this project is using both methods. So the qualitative methods to address some of the really important issues regarding owner care of senior dogs. Can you explain for anyone who doesn't really know the difference about a little more about what that involves and how it differs from quantitative research?
I can take it first, Carri, if you want, and then do you want to chip in?
Yeah.
Or yeah, all right, I'll have a go. Yeah, so qualitative research really involves talking to people, collecting data in the form of words. At least that's the type of qualitative research we're doing. So you're not looking at anything statistical, you're not looking at numbers, you're not looking at significances, you're looking at attitudes, experiences, opinions, understanding really the why of what people are doing. So big data, SavsNet, Vet Compass have given us a really, really good handle on what happens in the consulting room. It tells us, you know, what kind of consults we see, what animals there are, what conditions they present for, what vets do about them. But it doesn't tell us anything about why that happens. It doesn't tell us what happens outside the consulting room. It doesn't tell us what the barriers might be. And the advantage of doing qualitative research rather than, for example, just designing a survey from first off, is that we don't, when lots of the times when vets are doing surveys, totally understandably, we're populating the response options that owners would have to tick based on our knowledge and understanding and our perceptions of what those things might be. So actually what we find when we do qualitative research is that the response options in the survey and even the questions in the survey can be radically different, because then if you do a survey after you've done the qualitative research, you can build a survey that's based on actually this is what owners have said rather than the assumptions that we've made. And I think we've been guilty for a long time, maybe just not understanding very well how it is to to have one of these pets. And so by using the qualitative approach first, asking open questions, saying, tell us about this, how have you found this, recording those data, getting them written out into transcripts, going line by line through them, coding all of them for the kind of sense of the meaning of what's going on, and pulling out these big themes of, you know, just old age or not wanting to medicalize pets and going for vaccines that are consistent across different interviews, then that's a really, really nice way to start a project, to explore an area, to understand really in depth what's going on. So it's not about numbers, it's about words, and the data points we're working with are kind of sentences, paragraphs, phrases, in a very different way. We're not looking for statistical significance, we're not doing any stats, we're describing these are the experiences, these are the attitudes of real people who talk to us in depth about what's going on, and it is just as valid and just as important, if not much more important, I think, when you're doing research like this, to use these methods rather than the quant. Carri can probably be much more eloquent than me about topping that up.
No, that was a great description. Yeah, I think the main key is it's this bottom up approach, isn't it? Rather than top down, you imposing what options there are to answer. I mean, yes, we often put an other please describe option in surveys, and that's almost qualitative. The problem is people don't describe things very well. You get very short answers that way. Whereas if you sit in an interview, having a conversation with someone and say, so tell me about your animal, what's the hardest thing about owning such and such, and then they go off on something. They can take you down all sorts of avenues you'd never even really thought would be important to them, or you possibly thought it was, but you didn't really know how much it was going to be important. So it's building from the data up rather than imposing down. It's what's called an inductive approach.
Thank you. That was a great explanation. I think, certainly I'm an epidemiologist, so I always think about statistical significance. Yeah, absolutely. And
it's been a shock.
But it's so interesting because quite often when I'm reading papers, I'm thinking, yeah, but why? Yeah, but why? And that's exactly what you're getting to. And so I think it's really, really exciting. So
here's a quick example. So the reason me and Zoe met was because we both discovered the same thing through qualitative interviewing. The hard thing about qualitative work is that it's hard to tell whether it's just in your mind, whether you're imposing your ideas onto these transcripts and what these people are saying and you're interpreting something. But we independently were interviewing people about walking their dog, and we both came up with and almost used the same terminology to describe that there are two different types of dog walks. Really, there's kind of like it's a spectrum, but there's a distinction. And then she published it like about a month before mine was going to be published, and we both just went, instead of going, oh no, damn, it was like, hurrah, it wasn't just me who thought this, you've come up with the same thing. I think you called them leisure walks and functional walks, and I called them recreational walks and functional walks, but we both came up with the same word, functional, which was a word that the interviewees were actually, they said this walk is more of a functional walk, so they can almost even give you those themes. So yeah, that's why that can be so useful. Until then, nobody knew that what types of dog walks they were, and now that's out there in the literature and that we've both published.
Yeah, and even you saying that, I think now I'm not sure I would have ever described it as functional, but absolutely I can tell a difference between mine, the quick functional walk where I just need to get them out for a pee before I go to work, versus the weekend nice leisurely amble. So
that's exactly it. In hindsight, it makes a lot of sense, but this has never been described before.
No, brilliant. So if veterinary professionals listening to this webinar want to get involved in this project, is there an opportunity for them to do so?
Absolutely. So we've finished doing the in-depth interviews with vets and nurses and things, which you'd probably be quite relieved to hear, because I mean they did take up people's time, and we're extremely grateful, especially because we had to do this all online during COVID as well. We'd initially wanted to do it face to face. There are disadvantages to interviewing online rather than doing it face to face, but it is what it is. There are advantages to doing it online with the types of people we've managed to get in touch with that perhaps we wouldn't have before. So that part is over, but what we're doing right now, which Zoe mentioned previously, is we're developing surveys from that qualitative data, trying to decide what parts we put into the survey, because there's so much, we can't possibly cover it all. But what bits do we want to know more about from the owner perspective and from the vet perspective? So this summer, there will be surveys out there for veterinary professionals to complete, and also for owners to complete about their experience of living with and caring for a senior dog. So any help that we could get in advertising those surveys when they're out would be fantastic.
Great, thank you. Thank you all so much for giving up your time today to discuss this project. I could keep going because it's absolutely fascinating, but I am going to let you go. But I do hope that you will come back and give us an update at a later point in the project, perhaps. Yeah. Great, super. And thank you for listening. For more information on the PetSavers Old Age Pets project, please visit the website. A link can be found in the comments below the recording.